Back when I built a dining table for my parents, it replaced this one, but we didn't throw it away and kept it in storage because my sister could still use it. It's one of those simple expanding tables with an insert and everything works fine, but before my sister can use it, it needs a few modifications and a few repairs. Alright, so I have the table here disassembled in the workshop and I'm going to start with fixing up the base. There are two problems. One is that the joint between these pieces is kind of loose or broken. And the second problem is the way this middle rail joins to the leg assembly with this, no surprise, not glued in dowel. This fits in one of these holes, and in the other hole there is this kind of hardware. It's kind of a metal dowel with a thread, and when this is in place you can screw it together from the other side with this bolt. And as you can see, the bolt head has over the years quite squished itself into the wood. But that's not even too bad considering the table is 18 years old. But one problem that definitely didn't come from age is that this hole that the dowel joins into is far too big. So this dowel doesn't add any stability or stiffness. This joint here is actually not too bad. You can see 3 dowels, and I guess the glue just failed over the years, or they didn't use enough glue to begin with. So now I first try to just get this apart. There we go. If you look at the dowel ends, there's quite a bit of glue buildup that of course is dry, but on the rest of the dowel there is not too much glue, which could mean that they only used glue in the holes and not on the dowel and the dowel holes when they assembled it. And that just pushes all the glue to the end and there's not much glue left where it's actually needed. And I think it's a good idea to mark the pieces so I know which one belongs where. Great, a joint that wiggles but won't let go. My workbench is too light and constantly moves when I try to pull on this piece, so I clamped it to this wall. Slow progress, but at least some progress. Yeah, finally. Well, now just doing that again. Come on! Yes! Ah! Ah! Well, that was easy. Piece of cake. I'm not even sweating that much. Now fixing this will be relatively simple. Just clean up the joints and the dowels a little bit, add more glue and clamp it back together. I actually wanted to have these middle pieces separate because when I put it back together I will no longer use this bolt with a fastener and a dry dowel, but instead just glue this together with dowels. But instead of 2 I would use 5. To transfer the hole locations I have these dowel centering pins, and with the help of the existing holes and some dowels I can just press it on the centering pins and that leaves some pretty visible marks. Seems to line up pretty good, but if that's not good enough, clamps will help. And I'm spending some quality time pulling out dowels. Could you please grip? Huh. Works like a charm. Yep, perfect. Since pulling the dowels worked perfectly without problems, I've decided to make this drill template with the right hole spacing so I can drill out the parts of the dowels that had minor issues. 2 other pieces of 10mm anything will align it. Besides drilling out the dowels, I also drilled away the old glue. Then I cleaned up the joint surfaces, which basically is making them straight and flat again. Oops.
course, using more glue makes more mess, but that's what shop towels are for. Clamping this is quite a nightmare in terms of how and where to attach the clamps, because with the dowels at an angle I also have to kind of clamp at an angle, so I clamp straight along the dowels. So I've clamped this piece to this middle piece here with my biggest clamps, because these really need to press it hard against that. So when I tighten down these clamps, this won't slip. I clamped the second piece in the vise, which was a good idea, one less movement to care about. And now as you can see, the orientation of the clamps is the same orientation as the dowels in the piece. And that provides proper clamping straight along the dowel instead of something like this or this. So the clamps are not introducing any bending moment to this joint and clamp it properly. All of the joints look pretty good and closed, except for the first one. There's still a little bit of a gap. And I could try taking it apart and try again, but that would end like this again. And we don't want that.
You may wonder why I decided to glue it together. Now, I don't see an advantage of being able to disassemble it, at least like it was, other than it being cheaper for the manufacturer to ship and store it. But when you have it set up in your home, you only want it to be solid and rigid for years. And when you have to move homes, I think it's acceptable to have one more awkward piece.
The hole where the screw went, I'm covering up with a little plug. Uh-oh. Woohoo! It still fits the holes. Next I need to cut the table a little smaller, and therefore I got some very clear and specific instructions. A small problem could be these latches and alignment pins, but the cut I need to make will be exactly in between here.
Something about cutting into this tabletop just felt wrong. But then on the other hand, it also was quite fun. But I don't know why.
Perfectly missed the alignment pins.
Then comes the part that makes every day a better day. Sanding. With the belt sander it actually wasn't too bad and took me only about an hour to go through 40, 60, 80, 120 and 150 grit. And I also found a quick way to keep the cord and the hose out of the way. After sanding, I took off the support frame and added a new roundover. I went with a 10mm radius for the bottom and a 4mm radius for the top edge. Last preparation is sanding the edges before I applied 2 coats of varnish.
For the right alignment of the latch when remounting, I kind of put it in the right position, hold it with the finger, mark the center of the slot and drilled a hole there. Now I also screw it down in the center of the slot and can try the tension and adjust if necessary. It's too tight. That seems to be pretty good. And I can put in the second screw. For the expansion plate, this part of the latch is already in place and I have to mount this one properly. So to do that, I close that, pull that tight by hand and then make a mark a little off center. What this will do, since it's a countersink screw, is pull this piece a little bit back and therefore creating more tension when the latch is closed. Usually this works on the first try, but if not, I have a second hole to try again. Alright, it's done, and with the stiffer base and a perfectly smooth tabletop, it's ready for good use again. And my sister and her family can start embedding new memories into it. There's only one minor issue when the table is in its small or standard configuration. The tabletops don't meet perfectly, and I figured out that came from the sliding rails not being mounted perfectly straight to begin with. The distance between the support piece and the edge of the table is here about 9.5 centimeters and here 10.5 centimeters. With the middle piece installed, the alignment is perfect. To demonstrate the problem, I've made this paper model of the table, with these lines being the misaligned rails. These are the alignment pins, and these are the pieces that I cut off. Now I have a perfectly straight line. But now if I remove the middle section and slide the two halves back together, you see that there's quite a big misalignment, but also the alignment pins are not aligned. But these of course want to force the halves back together, and the rails allow for that because they have a little bit of flex, but also the alignment pins are not perfect. So the result is kind of a mix between the rails being not aligned and the pins being not aligned. And so there's a little bit of a misalignment on the edge. But one thing I know for sure, my sister won't care.
And here the table is in its new home. And if you wondered, the chairs against the wall are only used when necessary.
It's kind of a metal dowel with a thread to it, with a thread through it. And when this is in place, you can